The night my family gave my brother a standing ovation for being self-made, I was sitting 3 seats away with my banking app open under the table, watching a $6,500 payment process in real time. My mother raised her wine glass in the private dining room of a country club we had been coming to since I was 12 years old. She looked around at every aunt, cousin, and family friend gathered at that long table and said, with the kind of confidence that only comes from believing something completely, Mason achieved everything on his own. No help, no shortcuts, no one handing him anything. Just pure discipline and hard work. The table erupted. Actual applause in a restaurant. My uncle started it, and everyone else followed because that is how it works in my family. Someone sets the tone and the rest fall in line without stopping to ask questions. My brother sat there at the center of it all with one hand pressed to his chest in that particular gesture people use when they want to appear humbled by praise they fully believe they deserve. He smiled the smile of a man receiving an award he had genuinely earned. Meanwhile, on my phone screen under the table, the warehouse lease payment I had authorized that same morning was still showing as processing. $6,500. Same as every month for the past 18 months. I sat very still and waited for Mason to say something, to clear his throat and gently correct our mother, to say something like, well, Tessa helped me through some early rough patches, to acknowledge in even the smallest way that the applause landing on him had been partially funded by his younger sister sitting 3 seats away with a banking app open under a linen tablecloth. He didn't say a word. He just kept smiling. My mother continued. She talked about his grit and his vision and his business instincts. She talked about how proud the whole family should be. She used the word independent 3 times in 4 sentences, and each time she said it, I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger yet. Something quieter and more dangerous than anger. Recognition. The specific and clarifying recognition that comes when you finally understand exactly what role you have been playing in a story that was never actually about you. Then she turned to me with that expectant look she has been perfecting my entire life and said, Tessa, aren't you proud of your brother? I set my phone face up on the table. I looked at my mother. I looked at Mason. And I said, completely. And if he really did all of this on his own, then I am sure he will be fine without the $6,500 I just canceled before dessert. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. My brother's fork hit his plate. My aunt's hand stopped halfway to her wine glass. My mother's expression moved through about 4 different emotions in the span of 2 seconds. Mason's smile stayed on his face, but it changed, like a mask that had been fitted slightly wrong and was beginning to show the gap at the edges. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then Mason laughed. It was a short, dry, entirely unconvincing sound that told everyone at the table he was buying himself time. He waved one hand in my direction like he was brushing a crumb off the tablecloth. Tessa is being dramatic, he said. She helped with a couple of things a while back. That is what family does for each other. I picked up my phone and turned the screen toward him across the table. The warehouse lease renewed this morning, I said. Fleet insurance is due on Friday. The dispatch software billing cycles tomorrow. The payroll bridge transfer is scheduled for Monday. I tapped to the next screen. Should I keep reading? His face changed again. This time it changed all the way, and everyone present watched it happen. The performance dissolved from the outside in, and what was underneath was not shame or regret or even guilt. It was fear, clean and cold and specific. The fear of someone who has just watched the architecture of a very carefully maintained lie begin to give way. My mother grabbed my wrist. Not here, she whispered, her voice sharp and low. I pulled my hand back without hurrying. Why not here? I said. You praised him here. Mason leaned forward across the table. His voice dropped to something quiet and controlled and mean. You are embarrassing yourself, Tessa. I looked directly at him. No, Mason. I have been funding your image. Those are 2 very different things. The room went completely silent. Not just our table. The whole corner of the restaurant. What I had not told anyone at that table was what I had spent the previous 48 hours doing. I had not made a public announcement. I had not sent a mass text or posted anything online or composed some dramatic email to the family group chat. I had simply gone, quietly and methodically, into every account, every platform, every recurring payment where my name, my card number, or my credit had been keeping my brother's company operational. And I had removed myself from all of it. The warehouse manager had already received formal notice. The software platform would lock Mason out at midnight. The insurance policy would lapse without payment. The payroll advance he was counting on for Monday morning had been canceled 3 hours before my mother gave her her toast. Mason tried to recover by smirking. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You would not actually do that." I opened my email, found the confirmation thread, and slid my phone across the white tablecloth toward him. "I already did," I said. My cousin stopped chewing. My father, who had been sitting at the far end of the table in his usual careful silence, slowly closed his eyes. My mother looked at the phone screen and then looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not anger exactly, something closer to the look people get when they realize the ground beneath them is less solid than they believe. "Tessa," she said, "fix this." That was the moment I understood something I should have understood a long time ago. She thought I had made a threat. She did not understand that I had made a decision. Those are not the same thing, and the difference between them is everything. Mason stood up so fast his chair scraped backward across the polished floor. People at the neighboring table looked over. "You cannot blow up my business because you are jealous of my success," he said, loud enough now for the pretense of a private conversation to be completely gone. I stood too, but slowly. I wanted him to see that I was not shaking. "I am not blowing up your business," I said. "I am removing myself from it. If it cannot survive without me, then it was never really yours to begin with." His face went red. My mother started crying, and I noticed immediately that her tears were not for me. They were not for the 18 months I had spent quietly subsidizing the story of her son's independence. They were for Mason, for the possibility that he might finally be seen clearly. That specific observation hurt more than I expected it to, and it also made something inside me go very still and very certain. My father spoke for the first time. His voice was measured in the way it always is when he is trying to hold a situation together through tone alone. "Mason," he said, "is what your sister saying true?" Mason did not answer. He looked at me instead, and the look was not contrite or confused. It was accusatory. The look of someone who had counted on a secret remaining secret and was now furious at the person who had stopped keeping it. "You told me you would help until things were stable," he said. "I told you things would be stable 3 months in," I said, "and then again at 6 months, and then at Christmas, and then again last month when I asked you directly, and you told me you were 2 weeks from turning a corner." My mother wiped her face and straightened in her chair. "This is not the place to be keeping score," she said. "That sentence, I have been turning it over in my mind ever since, because what she meant, though she would never say it in those exact words, was that Mason was allowed to receive endlessly, and I was only in the wrong when I started counting what had been taken. The rules of my family, stated plainly, were that his needs were urgent and mine were inconvenient. I picked up my purse. I looked around the table one last time. "Enjoy the rest of the evening," I said. "I am sure the self-made man can take care of the bill." Then I walked out before anyone could see my hands shaking. Behind me, I heard Mason say my name once, sharp and furious. I did not turn around. For the first time in years, I understood with complete clarity that whatever was falling apart behind me was not my emergency to catch. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already lighting up. Mason first, then my mother, then Mason again, then a text from my father asking me to come back inside. I sat in the driver's seat, locked the doors, and watched their names cycle across my screen like a panel of alarms I had spent years conditioning myself to answer immediately. I let every call go to voicemail. When I got home, I made coffee even though it was approaching midnight, sat at my kitchen table, and opened a folder on my laptop that I had labeled simply Mason Payments. I had started it about 6 months in, not because I was planning anything, not because I wanted leverage or revenge, but because some quiet instinct in me knew that I might eventually need documentation, that I was not imagining things. The folder held lease receipts and bank transfer confirmations and screenshots of texts that arrived at odd hours and one voice memo Mason had sent me the week after I covered his first warehouse deposit. "You are saving my life, Tess. I will pay you back before anyone even knows." Before anyone knows. I sat with those 3 words for a long time. He had never wanted visible help. He wanted the kind of help that disappears, the kind that props up a narrative without appearing in it. He wanted to stand on a stage and call himself self-made, and he needed me to keep my mouth shut and my card on file for that to work. Just after midnight, his first message arrived. Dispatch software locked me out. "What did you do?" Not a question. A statement of accusation. I did not respond. At 12:18, he sent another. "My driver routes for tomorrow are gone. People are texting me. This is a serious precarious situation. At 12:41, the mask came fully off. Stop acting insane and turn it back on. Not I am sorry. Not I should have told the truth. Not thank you for everything you have done. Just a command. The command of someone who had never fully accepted that what I gave him had been a gift and not an obligation. I opened my banking app and canceled the final scheduled transfer, the one I had labeled in the memo field as temporary support, even though temporary had lasted a year and a half. Before I confirmed the cancellation, I changed the memo. 6 words. Final support ended. Stand on your own. I stared at the confirmation screen for several minutes. My heart was going fast, but underneath the adrenaline was something I did not immediately recognize because I had not felt it in so long. Relief, not happiness, not triumph, just the specific physical sensation of taking a full breath after an extended period of holding air you did not realize you were still holding. Mason sent one more message before I turned my phone over. You understand that if I go under, everyone is going to know it happened because of you. Even his failure, I noticed, had to be mine to carry. I put the phone face down on the counter and went to bed. I slept badly, but I slept. The next morning at work, my closest friend Natalie found me staring at an empty spreadsheet during our break. She sat across from me, took one look at my face, and said, "What happened?" I told her everything, from the dinner to the toast to the canceled payments to the midnight messages. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she did not tell me I had been too harsh or that family required a different kind of patience. She just asked me one question: how much of your own life has been put on hold so that your brother could look like a success? I had not been asked that directly before, and the answer arrived immediately and from everywhere at once. It was in the apartment I had not upgraded when my lease renewed. It was in the professional certification I had postponed twice because something of Mason's always seemed more urgent. It was in my savings account, which should have been considerably larger than it was. It was in the dental appointment I had rescheduled 4 times, and the weekend trips I had canceled, and the many small ways I had made myself financially smaller so that he could appear financially larger. Natalie leaned across the break room table and said, "Tessa, a boundary does not become cruel simply because someone entitled finds it inconvenient." I repeated that sentence silently for the rest of the day. By noon, Mason had sent 23 text messages. By 3 in the afternoon, my mother had left a voicemail telling me my brother could lose everything. I listened to it once, and then I said quietly to no one. Then maybe everything was built on the wrong foundation. That evening, Mason changed his approach. He sent me a photograph, the 2 of us as children, sitting on the hood of my father's old pickup truck, my arm around his smaller shoulders, both of us squinting into the sun. Below the photo, he had written, "I guess family means nothing to you now." My thumb hovered over the keyboard. The version of me that had existed a week ago would have responded. She would have explained herself and softened her position and probably offered one final payment with conditions she already knew he would not respect. I recognized her impulse clearly, and I did not follow it. I deleted the message without replying and opened my laptop and moved every receipt and transfer record into a second folder I labeled "Do Not Forget," not for legal purposes, not for any external audience, for me, because I already knew that the hardest part of what I had done would not be the financial separation. The hardest part would be surviving the guilt that my family would systematically direct at me for the act of finally choosing myself. 3 days later, my mother texted without asking whether I was available. 7 o'clock, she wrote. "Family meeting at the house. We need to discuss what you have done." The phrasing was deliberate, not what Mason had misrepresented, not what had been concealed from us, what I had done, what Tessa had done to upset things. I almost declined. Then something settled in me, and I decided that if they wanted a meeting, I would bring the truth in a form that could not be interrupted or reframed. I printed every receipt, every transfer confirmation, every invoice with my name on it. I printed the text messages where Mason had promised repayment. I printed the voice memo transcript. I organized everything chronologically in a plain manila envelope and drove to my parents' house. When I walked in, Mason was already at the dining table. He was wearing an expensive watch he had once told me was a gift from a grateful client. My mother sat beside him with tissues already positioned near her hand, as though she had prearranged her grief. My father stood near the fireplace with his arms crossed, doing what he always did in family conflict, which was to position himself as the eventual actual decider without committing to any particular truth until the room had settled around one. My mother began before I had fully sat down. "You need to restore the payments while Mason finds his footing," she said. I remained standing. "No," I said. Mason hit the table with his open palm. "You are doing this because you cannot tolerate watching me succeed." I took a breath. "Mason, your drivers were unable to leave the facility yesterday because your routing software was suspended. Your warehouse sent a delinquency notice this morning. Your insurance broker called my number because it was still listed as the payment contact. That is not success. That is a very expensive performance with no one left to buy the tickets." My mother's expression hardened. "You are humiliating him." "No," I said. "I spent 18 months humiliating myself so that he would not have to be. I am done." Mason pointed at me. "You made a promise." I opened the envelope and laid the papers across the dining table in a slow, deliberate spread. Receipts, invoices, transfer records, and text messages arranged in chronological order across the polished wood. "You promised repayment in 3 months," I said. "Those were your words. I have them in writing." Mason reached for the papers. I held them in place. "These are copies," I said. "Take them if you want." My father moved away from the fireplace and picked up the first invoice, then the second. His expression shifted in stages. The irritation he had walked in with gave way to something more complicated. $6,500, he said. "Every month." My mother turned on him. "Gregory, this is not the moment." He did not put the papers down. He looked at Mason. "You told us outside investment was covering operations." Mason's jaw tightened. "There were investors. Tessa just helped with the gaps." "Every month," my father said again, more quietly. Mason looked at the window. That small evasion changed the room completely. My father saw it. My mother saw it. Even the cousins who had been watching from the doorway of the kitchen saw it. My mother turned to me then, and I could see her trying to construct a version of this situation that preserved her existing understanding of things. "Why did you let us keep believing he was doing it on his own?" she said. I almost laughed. "Because every time I tried to tell you I was struggling, you told me not to make Mason's accomplishments about myself. Every time I said I needed to talk about what I was giving, you redirected the conversation back to his progress. I learned very early that my resources were a family asset, and my difficulties were a private matter." That sentence landed in a different place than the others. I watched my mother look down at the table. Mason tried one more time. He looked at me with the particular expression he has always used when he wants to appear wounded rather than cornered. "You always needed to be the important one," he said. "That is what this is really about. You cannot stand that I built something without you." The old version of me would have flinched at that. She would have scrambled to prove that her motives were pure, that she was not motivated by jealousy, that she genuinely wanted what was best for him. She would have apologized for the optics of her own accurate account. That version of me did not speak this time. I gathered the papers back into the envelope and said, "You are right that I need to feel important. Important enough to stop financing someone who treats me as a line item." My mother whispered, "He is your brother, and I am your daughter," I said. I waited. No one replied. That particular silence said more than anything anyone might have added. My phone buzzed on the table. An email from the warehouse manager. Subject line visible on the screen. "Account delinquent. Access restricted Monday without payment." Mason saw it. The color left his face. My mother reached for my arm. "Tessa, please." I looked at all three of them. "Monday is not my problem anymore," I said. I left the envelope on the table and walked to the door. Behind me, I heard my father's voice, lower now, asking Mason a question he had never asked before. "How much debt are you actually in?" I did not stay for the answer. I already knew it was larger than any of them were prepared to hear. What followed happened in fragments and over weeks, rather than all at once. The warehouse access was revoked Monday morning. 2 of his drivers quit when their direct deposits failed to land. A client terminated a contract after 3 consecutive missed deliveries. The company's social media went quiet. His professional profile photo disappeared and was replaced with a black square, which was theatrical enough to attract sympathy from people who did not know what had happened, but not informative enough to require him to explain it. I, in the meantime, did something that felt almost transgressive in its simplicity. I spent money on myself. I enrolled in the healthcare fraud analytics certification I had postponed twice in the previous year because Mason had needed something each of those times, and his needs had always seemed more urgent than my professional development. The first tuition payment came out of my account, and I sat with the confirmation email for a long time because there was no accompanying panic, just space, just the uncomplicated awareness that I had done something for my own future without measuring it against anyone else's emergency. My manager noticed I was staying late for the training modules and asked what I was working toward. When I explained the certification, he said it could position me for the audit leadership track. I saved that conversation in the same mental folder where I kept other things I did not want to forget. Mason continued unraveling in public. He borrowed money from 2 cousins and did not repay either of them. He asked a college friend to cover a payroll shortfall and was declined. He began posting quotes online about betrayal and loyalty and the people who abandon you when the cost of staying gets inconvenient. My mother liked every one of them. Then he made the mistake that collapsed the remaining family narrative in a single afternoon. He posted a long, emotional account of being sabotaged by someone close to him, of watching a promising business fold because a trusted person withdrew support without warning. He did not name me. He did not need to. Relatives began reaching out with sympathy and gentle suggestions that I reconsider. Then one of his former drivers, a woman named Kayla, left a comment on the post. It read, "Support disappeared," meaning the sister whose card kept the warehouse open for 18 months. The one you told us was your silent investor. Pay your employees before writing poetry about loyalty. Under her comment, a former vendor added their own account. 2 other employees confirmed that Mason had represented my recurring transfers as secured family investment when speaking to his staff and to at least 1 lender. Mason deleted the post within 20 minutes. The screenshots had already been distributed through the family group chat before he could. For the first time in this entire situation, I did not have to defend myself. Other people with no stake in protecting me and no particular reason to, had simply told the truth. My mother came to my apartment that same evening without calling ahead. When I opened the door, she was standing in the hallway without a prepared expression, without tissues in hand, without any of the performance she usually brought to difficult conversations. She looked like herself, smaller and less certain than the woman who had raised her wine glass at a country club and praised her son's independence while her daughter's name was on every bill keeping him operational. She asked if she could come in. I stepped aside. She sat on my couch and twisted her wedding ring. She said she had seen the screenshots. She said she had not known about the loan, had not known about the payroll failures, had not known that Mason had told people I was a silent investor. She said she thought I was helping because I wanted to. That sentence, said without apparent irony, told me everything I needed to understand about how my role in this family had been constructed and maintained. My wanting had never been consulted. My wanting had simply been assumed. Mom, I said, the first time I covered something for Mason, I wanted to help. Maybe the second time. After that, I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. Afraid of the disappointment. Afraid of the conflict. Afraid of being the person who let the family down. I was not helping from abundance. I was helping from fear. She covered her mouth. Every time Mason had a crisis, the whole family looked at me as the solution. I continued. Every time I had a difficulty, the family told me to be patient and generous. I became the contingency plan, and nobody ever asked me whether that was a role I had agreed to play. She cried. Not the performative crying I had seen her do at the dinner table. Real crying, quiet, and without audience. She said she had failed me. She said it directly and without caveat. I did not rush to absolve her. Healing does not work that way. I told her I heard her and that I needed time. She told me Mason was at the house, that my father had told him the family would not be covering the warehouse debt, that Mason had not received this news well. I asked if she was coming to me with a request. She said no. She said she was there because Mason had told her that if I did not come that evening, he would cut off contact with me permanently. She said this used to be something that would have frightened me. She said she knew that too. She was right. A month ago, that sentence would have sent me reaching for my keys before I had finished processing it. The threat of Mason's withdrawal had always functioned as a lever, and we had all known it, and most of us had allowed it to keep working. I picked up my keys. I told her I would come, but I was not bringing a solution. She nodded. I know, she said. When I walked into my parents' living room, Mason was standing near the window with a bag at his feet. The coffee table was covered in unopened envelopes, final notices, overdue invoices, the demand letter from the warehouse, the loan documentation, the accumulated physical evidence of 18 months of borrowed time. My father was sitting in his chair. My mother took her position near the kitchen doorway. Mason turned when he heard me come in, and his voice had the quality of someone who had been waiting to perform an emotion and was no longer certain which one was appropriate. "Happy now?" he said. I walked to the table and looked at the papers without responding immediately. Then I said, "No, but I am free." What followed was not a dramatic confrontation. It was quieter and more exhausting than that. My father, for the first time in my memory, declined to manage the room in Mason's favor. When Mason tried to redirect accountability toward me, my father said, "She stopped doing something you had no right to expect. That is different from what you are describing." Mason's expression in that moment was one I had never seen on his face before. The specific disorientation of someone encountering accountability from a direction they had always considered safe. I told him I was placing a written boundary on the table, not a threat, a document. I was not paying his debts. I was not co-signing anything. I was not covering operations, payroll, software, or emergencies. I was not available for abusive messages at midnight. If he wanted a relationship with me in the future, it would begin with a genuine apology and a repayment plan reviewed by someone neutral, not because I expected every dollar back, but because he needed to understand concretely what he had taken and from whom. Mason stared at the paper. "You are treating me like a stranger." "I am treating myself like a person," I said. My mother did not ask me to soften it. My father picked up the document and read it and said it was reasonable. The word landed in the room like something small and definitive. Mason sat down. His shoulders dropped. His voice, when he finally spoke again, was not performative. He said, "I don't know who I am without the business." That was the first true sentence of the entire evening. I saw my brother in that moment, not the version he had been performing for years, not the golden boy or the self-made founder or the victim of my alleged jealousy, just a person who had built his sense of himself on a version of events that was no longer supportable and who had no idea what came next. I did not reach for him. I told him that finding out was his work to do and that I was willing to be in his life when he had done some of it. Then I left. The business closed officially the following week. He sold the watch, he moved into a smaller place, he took a warehouse job on the night shift. He enrolled in an accounting course because a financial counselor told him he had been running operations he did not have the literacy to understand. Months later, he sent me a bank transfer for $200. The note said, "First repayment. I know it is not enough. Starting anyway." I looked at it for a long time. Then I wrote back 2 words. Keep going. No punctuation. No warmth performed for an audience. Just an acknowledgement that something had shifted and a door that was not open yet, but was perhaps no longer locked. What I know now is this: love does not require you to disappear inside someone else's story. Generosity given from fear is not generosity. It is self-erasure with a more acceptable name. A boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of clarity, and the people who call it cruel are almost always the ones who benefited most from your willingness to live without one. I finished my certification. I took the promotion. I found a better apartment and painted the walls a color I chose for no reason other than that I liked it. And for the first time in longer than I can accurately calculate, the money in my account at the end of every month was mine.